What is up, everybody? I hope everyone's having a great day. Welcome to another top 5 list here on the channel. Last couple we did, I feel like people enjoyed, so these are fun for me to make. Today we're going to be doing the top 5 most disappointing characters in Fire Emblem 6, which obviously this is according to me, so this is going to be an extremely subjective list, which is kind of why I wanted to do this intro, to just explain what I mean by disappointing. Obviously, we'll talk about the characters as they come up, but just know this is very subjective. If you don't agree with me, perfectly fine. As always, please let me know in the comments what you guys found disappointing. I'm always interested in those sorts of things. But what do I mean by disappointing? I don't mean just terrible characters in the game. Like, of course, Wendy is disappointing because she's awful, but there's no like reason that you should think Wendy would be a good character. So she's not really like disappointing, at least in the way that I'm sort of thinking about it here. Because her classes, her stats, and her base level are all terrible. But if one of those was better and she was still bad, like if she was a dancer and bad, that doesn't really happen. There's no dancers on this list. But like that would be weird, right? That would be kind of strange and disappointing. So that's what I mean. I tried to pick some different reasons for disappointment on this list, but yeah, that's what I mean. It's characters that you think should be better than they actually are based off of something, right? So not Wendy or Sophia. So it should be fun. This is of course very personalized to me. So as I said, I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks in the comments. We're gonna do 2 honorable mentions, and then we'll do my top 5 list. Yeah, let's get right into it. All right, so we'll get right into my first honorable mention, which is Corel. So, if you heard me talk about Fire Emblem 6 before, you probably know that I'm not a huge fan of Corel. Um, he's a unit that, as I've exclaimed before, if you don't get all the divine weapons, isn't even a character in the game. The reason I have him as an honorable mention and not actually on the list is he's not really that disappointing because the purpose he's supposed to be serving, which is basically like the Joda of the game, but basically like this old, renowned like swordmaster who kind of helps you at the very end of the game, he actually does fulfill quite well. And he's kind of a cool character. I just think he's disappointing because, again, some playthroughs never even get to see him, which I think is disappointing in and of itself. And even if you do, he's just not a very good Goda. But that's mostly just because of his class. Again, I find Corel just kind of disappointing because he just sort of isn't a character in the game. But as far as his purpose is concerned in the game, he actually does it just fine. So, again, an honorable mention, not on my top 5 list, but I do find Corel a little bit disappointing in this game. My other honorable mention is Zeus. So Zeus is a character that I feel like should be better than he is, and this is again, this list is going to be very personalized. I just never have very much success with Zeus. He is all the things that you should want in a character. He's got great bases because of hard mode. He's got a great class in Wyvern Rider. He's recruited fairly late, which is disappointing, but not too late. But he just never winds up being that good for me, and I think there's a few reasons for this. I think the fact that Mildy always gets the Delphi shield means that he's just like the Pegasus Knights in the game, kind of like left out to dry. Like a big part of why Zeus is so good is because he's bulky, like most wyverns. But without the Delphi shield, you have to be really careful with him. So I think that's a problem. And I also think his like, despite his stats being really high, his like lower speed stat means that he just doesn't have the offensive output of a lot of your other units. Milady being a great example. I know comparing him to Milady is sort of unfair given how busted she is, but I don't know. He's a unit that you look at and he should be great, and he just never winds up being that good for me. Starting my actual top 5 list, we have the main character of the entire game, and that is Roy. So I will say this is sort of an era of Fire Emblem where most lords are just really disappointing. You have like Eliwood in the next game, even Hector with his late promotion, although he is pretty good. Lyn. Previously, you have like Leaf. Obviously, Sigurd is sort of an exception. There are some good ones, but for the most part, you have a lot of really bad lords. Erica, if you want to go even further, and Roy is no exception to that. So you could make the argument that he's not disappointing because all the lords are bad. He's just one of them. But I still think there's two major reasons that he's so disappointing when it comes to this game. Roy as a character is actually not too bad. He's fairly useful, at least at the beginning. Although obviously he falls off and you can't really do anything with him because of his late promotion. And that's the first reason that I find him so disappointing, which is his incredibly late promotion. Um, Part of the problem with Lords, I talked about Leaf, Hector, Ike, Erica, whatever, Ephraim, is that they just have really late promotions. But Roy takes that to a whole new level. I mentioned that Corel isn't even a character unless you go get all the divine weapons and go past Sephiel. Roy promotes in the final chapter of the entire game if you don't go past that. And even if you do, you get him for like 2 more chapters. So an extremely disappointing promotion time, somehow even worse than characters again like Leaf or Hector that already have atrocious promotion times. So I think he's really disappointing for that reason. The other reason is his animation. So I will say he is better than Leaf from the previous game. But Roy actually has really cool animation post promotion, but he only gets it when he uses the sealed sword. So even if you did train him a bunch and use him a bunch at the very end of the game, you only get to see that cool animation when he's using the sealed sword. I don't know why they didn't just make that his animation all the time. I know obviously the ranged animation sort of part of it is specific to the sealed sword, but like you can still just have that for the light brand. I don't know. I feel like that would just be really cool. I don't hate Roy's like previous animation, but I really like his promotion animation. I feel like it should just be all the time. Again, it is still better than Leaf in the previous game, who got completely shafted with no unique animation, even with a special weapon. Um, but it does still disappoint me. And again, his late promotion, I think Roy is a pretty disappointing character, even though, again, most lords around this time just are disappointing characters. Coming in at number 4, we have OJ. Now, OJ is a pretty terrible unit. He's pretty darn bad. Um, and if you look at him, there's nothing really about his like stats or anything like that that would lead you to believe that he's a very good unit. He's under leveled when you get him. He has pretty bad bases, doesn't have hard mode bonuses or anything. But the reason he's on this list and the reason that I find him disappointing is because basically every other mercenary and or hero in the GBA games is really really strong. So like in this game, for example, you have Deke. Raven isn't spectacular, but at least he has like insane strength, speed, and skill. Harkin, Garrick, these are all insanely good units. And OJ just like isn't, he's just not very good. Even though like right after you recruit him, you go to the Western Isles, which actually makes it fairly easy to train him. But even then he gets shown up by Fur, who's also not a very good unit, but is just like better than him in basically every way. So OJ doesn't really have a purpose in the game. He's not very good. But the main reason is again just his class and sort of the tradition, I guess you could say, of GBA mercenaries and heroes that wind up being really good. Unfortunately, OJ just doesn't fall into that. He doesn't have the like bulk of like Garrick or Harkin or the just insane offensive stats of like Raven. And he's not recruited enough or has the basis of like Deke to just be really useful. Also, and this is sort of a personal thing, part of the reason that I've always sort of been really disappointed by OJ is I had a playthrough once that was like a disaster by chapter 7. I lost like all my good characters. But I got past chapter 7, and when I recruited OJ, I was like, all right, maybe OJ can help me carry this run. I don't use him very much. And he wound up being so strong to the point where he carried the mid game. By the end of the game, he was like using the S ranked axe, which I think is the Armads or something like that. He was awesome, and every time I've trained him since, he's been absolutely terrible, just god awful. So I think I just got really lucky once. But I think with or without my sort of personal account, I think he is a pretty disappointing character, considering how cool he could be. Coming in at number 3, we have maybe one of the weirder characters in the game, and that is Fa or Faye. Sometimes it's Fae in the games. I'm not really sure. Either way, I'll say Fa for the purposes of this. Is a character who's honestly just not really in the game. She's a little bit like Soth from Path of Radiance, where she like shows up and can offer some decent utility, but like you very rarely deploy her. You don't even like get her on a chapter or anything. She just shows up at the bottom of your deployment on the Douglas chapter. Now, Fa as a character in the game is actually fairly useful. She starts with an insane amount of resistance, which she can immediately on the chapter she's recruited take purge hits, take no damage from purge hits, which is insanely good. Also, you if you train her a little bit, you can get her to the point where, let's say you're on Sakai, she takes no damage from any of the nomads, and they love attacking her. So she definitely has some uses in the game. But her biggest disappointment, which is probably pretty obvious if you played the game, she only has one weapon, and that is a 30 use Divine Stone. I'm not sure if it's Divine Stone or the Dragon Stone in the game. But either way, that's it. That's all you can do with her. I think the much better version of her is Myrrh from Sacred Stones, who gets 50 uses, and that game's just a lot like shorter, I guess. There's not very many chapters with her. It's really easy to train her and get a lot of utility at the end of the game with her. Whereas with Fa, like again, there are some slight utility that you can get from her. She's not a bad unit. I actually think she's a decent unit, but you just can't really like do anything with her because again, you only get 30 uses from that, and you can't hammer it or anything. And once it's gone, she can do literally nothing. She's a character that is so disappointing. I've always felt like maybe there's some other Dragonstone you can get in the game because it's like so weird. They only give her 30 uses, but at least to my knowledge, there's nothing else you can do with her. So despite being actually, I think, a pretty useful character, I find Fa very disappointing. And coming in at number 2, we have Gonzalez. So this one might be slightly controversial because I feel like in talking to people, whether it be in my stream or through these YouTube videos, people seem to really like Gonzalez. I'm really low on Gonzalez um, because of one major reason, and that is being axe locked. So I'm just going to say this right off the bat. I love Gonzalez. I think he's awesome. He's the only brigand that you get to use in any of the GBA games. He wears purple pants. I mean, it's just awesome. He's a sweet character. And the reason he's so disappointing isn't even necessarily that. It's because his stats are so ludicrous. I mean, if you choose the A route on the route split that you recruit him on, he comes as I think something like a level 7 unit with like over 40 health. I think he has like 19 strength. Most of these are because of hard mode bonuses, of course. His stats are just absolutely ridiculous. And if you think about it, this should be like the perfect character. He has insane HP, insane strength. His speed is also pretty good. He can take hits fairly well, but he's just so inconsistent because axes in this game just are their hit rate is so bad. I just always find him really disappointing. Part of it too, for me at least, is I always seem to go Sakai for some reason. Would not recommend this, but for some reason I do, and he's especially bad on Sakai because hitting those nomads is an absolute nightmare for him. If you go Ilya, he's a little bit better, but his low hit rates are just so disappointing. I never talk about skill with units, but Gonzalez's skill is really low, and that in conjunction with the low hit rates from the axes just again make it so inconsistent. And when you're trying to rely on units in the mid to late game, it is really annoying to have to rely on these like 60 hit rates. You're not going to see a lot better than 60s and 70s at the very most, even when he has weapon triangle. He also has some slight problems, like his defense and resistance aren't very good, and eventually that HP that'll get to 60 really fast won't carry him. But no, statistically he's awesome. It's just that again, those hit rates just make it so frustrating to watch him miss time after time after time. Even though, again, like most units on this list, I still think he's a solid unit, and I think training him is totally fine. He's just disappointing because of those hit rates. And finally, topping out our list at number 1, we have Ray. So Ray was always going to be my number 1 here for one major reason, and that is because Ray is an enemy that does not get hard mode bonuses. So for those of you that don't know, basically all units that start as enemies in Fire Emblem 6, and this goes for like a lot of other games like the GBA games, get hard mode bonuses. And hard mode bonuses in this game are really powerful. Rucker, Milady, and Percival, 3 of the most powerful characters, the best characters in the entire game, all benefit from hard mode bonuses. There are very few characters in this game that don't get them. There are a few like Douglas, I guess, is sort of recruited as an enemy. Hugh, I guess, doesn't get them. But Ray to me is the biggest one where if he just had hard mode bonuses, he would be such a sweet character. But he winds up being so mediocre every time. And I don't know. I really like shamans. I really like druids. I find a lot of them really underwhelming in the GBA games, and I just wish he was a little bit better. I wish he had those hard mode bonuses. For some reason in this game, if an enemy starts on a chapter, they don't get those bonuses. But if they like appear after the chapter started, they get the bonuses. The best way to look at this is Percival. The first chapter that Percival starts on, which is the chapter that you get Milady, the Bridges chapter, he does not have hard mode bonuses. It's just that you basically never recruit him here because it's incredibly difficult. When he shows up again a few chapters later, he gets those bonuses because he shows up after the chapter starts. Hell, even Milady gets hard mode bonuses, even though she's not really an enemy. She just is technically a red unit when she flies over to Roy and recruits herself. But for some reason, Ray does not get hard mode bonuses. Obviously, this is incredibly subjective. Ray, again, not a terrible character. He's pretty good. Dark magic in this game kind of sucks because of its hit rate, but it's not too bad, and he has like healing utility when he promotes and stuff like that. But I just think the Druid class is so sweet. Thankfully, they do give you Nime in this game, who is an amazing character. So you don't get no Druids in the game. In fact, that's the only female Druid other than Sophia you can get. But unfortunately, I don't know. I wish Ray was just a little bit better. And there's like that reason where it's like, man, if he just had hard mode bonuses, that would be so sweet. Even though, again, he is still a pretty decent character in the game. And yeah, that's going to round out our list. So again, as I said at the beginning, these are incredibly subjective. Do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? Please feel free to put down in the comments who you found disappointing or if you found any of these units disappointing. And yeah, I will see you next time. Thanks for watching, everybody.